Hi all, Rick here with a Starship Breakdown, looking at the one-time appearance of the Sonar battleships. In its real origin, the Sonar battleship or cruiser had relatively little design direction in the brief or script. Therefore, John Eaves was left with a lot of freedom to design the vessel. He took the shape of a boomerang as a basis, something that apparently he'd always wanted to use as a design base but seldom had the opportunity. As a new introduction into Star Trek Insurrection, the Sonar had no established design philosophy, so he was free to experiment using a lot of outdoor toys. Thrown horseshoes, lawn darts, shuttlecocks and boomerangs. Initial designs reflected this choice, and some would develop into other Sonar ships. The only concern was that the designs were looking rather flat, which fitted with the blade-like aggressive nature of the Sonar, but it meant that they risked being lost in the background during scenes. To counter this, some verticality was added in the form of fins. The original CGI model for the battleships was lost with time, however, and had to be recreated in Lightwave for Eaglemoss, and that covers the only appearance of the Sonar ships we get onto the in-universe lore. The Sonar are known for their advances in certain areas of technology, mostly medical and genetics, but also with particle physics and energy transfer. Very specialised fields of expertise, and while the rest of their technology is on par with most other powers, it's only in these two fields that they excel. While the Baku themselves, who are the same people as the Sonars, share above Federation level knowledge of tech, the Sonar themselves are also vastly ahead in theory and research. However, what limits them are numbers and resources. Unable to reproduce and aging, they have turned to a variety of other methods to remain in power. Now, technically they joined the Dominion during the war, however they were not considered a major target by the Federation, with the exception of the Ketracel White facilities. They were not given a technological edge by the Founders, but were given access to their genetic research, so despite their alliance, the Sonar remained in this strange area of still being bound up in, but not heavily, with the Dominion. This allowed them to forge their own pact with the Federation too, through Admiral Doherty, for seizing their home system of the Baku. This is speculation here, and it's not brought up in the shows, but I can see that as being another reason the UFP would want to compromise on its ideals with the Sonar. Should they reclaim their planet's healing energies, then they would have had no need for the genetics of the Dominion, and may potentially stop supplying them. Still not worth the trade-off in my opinion, but it's a potential tactical justification. So, the Sonar battleship was a relatively new design that was created in the days of tension leading up to the Dominion invasion. With the Sonar setting up territory within UFP borders, they were protected from the Klingon Empire, and their borders were negotiated with the Federation, which saw them as nomadic outcasts in need of a home. However, with relatively few, the Sonar turned to slave labour within the Orion Syndicate and nefarious elements of the Klingon Empire to populate their ranks. Their ships, too, made use of other immoral shortcuts to power, such as the inclusion of subspace weaponry, something banned by the Federation and several other powers by treaty for their dangerous and unpredictable effects. The battleship was a wide vessel that was dominated by these sweeping wing nacelles. Classified by Starfleet as warships, these large cruisers stood on par with most Federation starships, with two of them being more than a match for a Sovereign class, thanks mostly to their nefarious device's payload. There were smaller Sonar vessels too, but it was these larger arcs that stood out as the lead vessels of the Sonar. Thanks to their strange shape, they were 707 metres long, which made them a sizable 1.004 kilometres wide and about 147 metres tall. Its crew had a relatively few Sonar on board, with high automation, indentured species, and mercenary crews to operate them. In terms of engines, its propulsion is mostly unknown to Starfleet, but it is designed to operate with greater efficiency in hazardous nebula and radiation than unspecialised Starfleet vessels, to be expected of ships that routinely operate in the Briar Patch. The warp nacelles are unlike Starfleet design and are housed on the very end nodules of the wingtips. Each seems to be rather small, which indicates that perhaps the other needed technology is located throughout the wings themselves. The extensive warp-field trim vanes lined the wings and were responsible for maintaining a warp field, and specialised ram scoop deflector bars all assisted in cutting through particle clouds. In terms of impulse, each has 4 engines, with the main drives offering incredible manoeuvrability thanks to their spacing apart, and the secondary drives offering a majority of thrust. It had 2 4 isolytic plasma beam emitters and 3 rear-facing ones for coverage mounted on the large fin. It had 2 4 torpedo launchers and 1 rear, which could fire photon torpedoes. However, unbeknownst to the Federation, the sonar also carried payloads of banned tricobalt isolytic torpedoes. These devices would detonate and deliberately create a disruption in subspace, often forming tears, or at least intense turbulence, which was expected to snowball into dangerous subspace phenomena. Such agitators were illegal, and the resulting subspace effects were very hard to control, direct, and with a large margin for unexpected results. The use we see in Star Trek resulted in a subspace wavefront forming, which in turn was drawn to the subspace distortion of the target vessel, in this case the Enterprise, essentially tracking the ship and preventing warp drive while it gains. In additional lore, the sonar do not stop their research into this field, and by the 25th century have developed a form of deflector pulse which replicates the effect, but with a more guidable wavefront. Finally, they've got powerful sensor systems that are potentially even better than Starfleet's at close range, and equally powerful communications gear designed once more for cutting through the interference of places like the Briar Patch. The only real vulnerability is that their ships are not armoured that much after their shielding fails. The sonar are an interesting bunch when it comes to ship design and technology. Originally from a species that rivaled the greatest minds in the Federation, they retain much of the know-how, but thanks to being less than a century old and severely limited in number, they lack the ability to put much of it to use. Rather than turning to trade and using their knowledge to bolster others in return for these resources, they instead turned to slavery, backroom deals and theft to procure what they needed. Their vessels have that ruthless look to them that captured their choices in direction, with a narrow profile built for combat and the blade-like sweeps of their battleships. Thanks for watching this breakdown on the Sonar Battlecruiser. I've been Rick, and until the next lore video, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you later. Goodbye.